Welcome back to Certified Examiner Training videos. We're going over the maneuvers. Next up is park and start on a hill. If you're looking at your score sheet, you're going to find this on the left side, right around the middle. Remember, all the maneuvers are in the upper left corner. Backing, parallel parking, park start on a hill, starting, and lane travel. You'll find all those on the upper left side of your score sheet. Okay. Let's first cover the examples of automatic disqualification. If you've watched the other videos, you know it's getting a little repetitive, right? Anytime there's damage to property, you score that as an accident. So, right, they pull over and make a little damage to the grass. That's an accident. Automatic disqualification, of course, means the test ends, scoring stops, and you take the most direct route back to the school. Anytime there's more than one tire over the curb, you score that as a dangerous action. Anytime you have to intervene, verbally or physically, to stop the applicant from either hitting a parked car, approaching car, or an object, score it as a dangerous action. Anytime surrounding traffic has to take, read this carefully, evasive action to avoid a collision, swerving into another lane, or braking hard, score this as a dangerous action. Remember not to take it out on the applicant in case you just have someone who's irritated that they're moving slowly or trying to park carefully. Sometimes people get agitated and drive more aggressively to make it look like they're taking evasive action, but they're really not. Hopefully you'll be able to distinguish the difference. First penalty, vision, as it is for most of these. So when the applicant fails to use best possible vision when re-entering traffic, checking the blind spot of the left shoulder, or failing to use best possible vision while moving within the parking space. So if they pull into the space and they decide they want to back up a little bit to get a better position for the wheels, they should be primarily looking in the direction the car is moving. Remember, checking the blind spot does not mean touching the chin to the shoulder. You like to teach that, of course, we do as well, but it is not a requirement on the state driving test. Remember, do give them credit if the applicant appeared to use their peripheral vision. The signal is used when the applicant fails to give a proper signal when entering traffic. So when you tell them re-enter traffic, they have to use a signal then. Now remember, if the applicant does not signal when approaching the curb, so when they're arriving to the maneuver, but they move over more than one car width to the right, score that under lane travel. Remember, all approaches into a maneuver scored under lane travel. When you're leaving the maneuver, you score it under the maneuver itself. All right, PB here is for parking brake. That's pretty easy. This means the applicant has failed to secure the parking brake. Now, if you look up in the upper right corner of your score sheet, you'll see under mechanical operation, there's also a PB there, okay? Now that one is here. If the parking brake is not released when they attempt to leave, to tell them so they don't damage their vehicle. And you score that one under mechanical operation, parking brake, which meant they left the parking brake on and they were attempting to move the car. Now, cars are getting newer. Sometimes their car may automatically engage the parking brake and is unable to be turned off or manually engaged. Don't score it. Sometimes cars do it on their own now. Gear. So if your applicant fails to put a manual transmission into gear for this parking maneuver, they can't leave it in neutral, have to put it in gear, or fail to put an automatic transmission in park, you would score this here under gear. The wheels error. So the applicant fails to turn the front wheels in the proper direction. Now, they don't need to make a full rotation of the wheel, right? If the applicant attempts to turn the wheel correctly, either partially or when the curb hinders their movement, do not score it as an error. Remember which way applicants have to turn their wheels. If you're parking uphill with a curb, the wheels must be turned away from the curb. If they're parking downhill, you need to turn the wheel toward the curb. And anytime they're parking uphill or downhill without a curb, the wheels need to be turned toward the edge of the road, toward the curb. Now, sometimes you'll get into the spot and you'll have not maybe been watching the applicant and can't remember which way they turned the wheel. That's okay. Once you tell them to re-enter traffic, you'll see pretty quickly which way the wheels were turned. distance. Now, if you see here, in this section, there's a 4-point distance penalty under danger potential, and there's a 2-point distance penalty under congestion potential. So the 4-point one is the critical one. If the applicant fails to put the front tire or both tires within about 12 inches of the curb or the edge of the road. Front tire or both tires, just circle the 4-point distance penalty. The 2-point distance penalty is for the rear tire only. We'll get to that shortly. Control. So if the applicant does not maintain complete control of the vehicle or allows vehicle to roll forward or backward significantly, keep that word in mind, significantly while parking. So if they get a little goofy and crazy and moving the car all around, you're like, you are clearly not in control of this car. We're going to score that lack of control. This is very rare. This is very rare. I've done over 7,000 driving tests, and I may have scored this 3 or 4 times at best over those years. You'll see there's another one, CTL, on the next line down. That is a very specific penalty. It's not a lesser version of it. It's a different one entirely. So if they're really out of control, you're going to score the 4-point control error. Next up, the curb penalty. Now you'll see there's also a second curb penalty on this maneuver. There's curb penalties on several maneuvers, so it's important to know what this means. This is only for one wheel over the curb when leaving. It's bold and italicized for a reason. One wheel over the curb when leaving. That's it. So where do you score it if the applicant hits the curb while approaching the parking area? Lane travel. We haven't covered this yet, but if you look down on the score sheet, you'll see on the danger potential line, 4 points, a penalty called curb. So if the applicant hits the curb while approaching the area, is scored under lane travel. Remember, anytime 2 wheels over the curb is scored as dangerous action. Next up is jockeying. So if the applicant makes more than 2 moves when positioning the vehicle after driving to the side of the road. So when they drive to the side of the road, you don't count that. You don't count that at all. You do count this, moving backwards, forward, backward again. That's 3 moves. That's jockeying. Don't count the one when they drive to the side of the road. Now here's the other curb penalty, the 2-point variety, lack of skill. Strikes the curb when leaving the park position. If it's only a slight scrape, don't get ticky-tacky. Don't score it. Strikes the curb when leaving a park position, but didn't put the tire on top of the curb. Right? That's the 4-point version. Curb strike is the 2-point version. When leaving the park position. I want you to read that carefully because we're going to talk about that here in a second. Remember, where do we score the curb error if an applicant hits the curb while approaching the maneuver area? Lane travel. It's a 4-point error if they hit the curb on the way in. Curb strike or on top. Now, what do we score if the applicant hits the curb while jockeying the car within the space? So they've made their approach and they're moving back a little bit and then they hit the curb. Pretty good. Hit the curb pretty good. You're like, oh, that's a curb penalty. It isn't. It is not defined. Remember, if it's not in the manual, you don't score it. You want to score it, you're like, that was terrible. You shouldn't hit the curb like that. Clearly you're not having a good day with this. It's not scored for hitting the curb. Now, if you want to make a case for them being significantly out of control, then you might consider the control penalty in the 4-point section. You'll need to use your best judgment here. Were they really out of control, or did they just momentarily misplace where they thought the curb was? I'm going to leave that up to you. That's up to you. Use your best judgment. The control penalty here, the 2-point version, this one is very specific. If you release the parking brake, you see that guy's hand there is on the parking brake there, his right hand. If you release the parking brake without having your foot on the foot brake, you score this 2-point control penalty here. It's kind of a weird one. but it's a penalty. If you see this picture right here, this guy does not have his foot on the brake pedal and is getting ready to release the parking brake. They have to have their foot on the foot brake when they're releasing the parking brake. If not, you score this control penalty here. That's all that's for. Finally, the 2-point distance version. When the rear tire only is more than 12 inches from the curb or the edge of the road. Not as dangerous, but does contribute to congestion. There's a congestion potential there, so that's why it's left here. So if the front tire is also too far away, only circle the 4-point distance penalty, not this one. This one is only if just the rear tire is more than 12 inches from the curb or the edge of the road. And again, yeah, that's what I mentioned here. Both tires are more than 12 inches, just circle the 4-point distance version. Okay, next up, we'll go on to the starting maneuver. See you then.